Welcome to Ali Fitness Podcast, a weekly production all about bringing health into fitness. So today I want to start off with a quote from our guest, Mary Shores. She says, "Everything we say, everything we do, every choice we make in the thinnest sliced moments of life is either creating a connection to what we want or it's driving a disconnection." And that really resonates with me, and maybe we'll talk a bit about that later. So Mary's roller coaster life began with being abandoned at a young age and tragically losing her first child. But Mary was able to overcome life's hurdles and turn tragedy to triumph by founding her now 8-figure business, Empire, at age 24. She's an expert in personal development, but she's not a life coach. She's a businesswoman, an author, who discovered a roadmap of how to get in control of her life. She truly walks her talk by generating pragmatic solutions for people who are freaking out. Mary blends personal experience with her extensive knowledge of neuroscience and human behavior to guide businesses and individuals to defeat the freak out and create their ideal life. On meeting Mary, I would never have guessed what a challenging life she had had, and was quite surprised at her success when I learnt how challenging her history had been. I feel like her teachings can help us get fit and healthy in all areas of our life. Mary, pleasure to have you on the show and welcome.
I'm so excited to talk to you again. I can't wait to hear how you're doing and get going with the show.
Excellent. So I thought, look, I know it's been an absolute journey for you, and I just, like I said, when I met you, I couldn't see that history was there. And if you don't mind, I'd love to just touch upon your background and maybe just a brief sort of history and how you've got to where you are today.
Sure. I think it's a great question and very valid. And I love that you say, in meeting me, you would never have suspected that, because I think that that's a testament that true healing is always possible. So in order for people to, really understand where I'm at, I think it's super useful to know where I came from. And that is simply that at the age of 16, I was about as close to homeless as you can be without being homeless. So I literally lived in a box. It was a 10 by 50 wooden trailer. By the time I was 19, I was a single mother with a daughter who passed away with profound brain damage. What that looks like is that she was blind, she was deaf, she was unable to suck a bottle. She didn't have the human instinct, so she couldn't suck or swallow, which meant she had to have a gastrostomy tube surgically implanted into her stomach. She later did pass away as a result of her brain damage. And by the time I was 24, I was then founding this business that became, huge success in my life. But I did that all with the trauma that I had experienced, as well as not having a formal college education in the form of a degree.
Wow, that's profound. And do you mind if I ask, how old was your daughter when she died?
Yes, that's a great question. She was about 18 months old when she passed away. So she was expected to live only for 3 days. I had a pretty serious emergency C-section, which kept me in the hospital for 4 days. And they had transported her to another trauma unit at another hospital about an hour away. So honestly, they were preparing me for the fact that I may never actually meet her alive. So the expectation was she would be passed away before I even got out of the hospital and could get to her.
And before giving birth, did you have any inkling of this sort of disorder?
No. So she actually was healthy. It boiled down to a period of time during labor and delivery where she had lack of oxygen for over 5 minutes. They told me later that it was equivalent of taking a newborn and putting the newborn at the bottom of a swimming pool and leaving the newborn there for 5 minutes and then resuscitating. So she actually was resuscitated at the time of birth. And the interesting thing about that is one of the things that I didn't know is when a child is considered stillborn, it may be that they have a heartbeat, but that their heartbeat is so low, they know that if they bring that child back, it's just going to be at devastation. And so at that time in 1992, that I don't know, cutoff, I don't know what the right words to use, was 60 beats per minute. And she was right at that cutoff. So they did resuscitate her. But they also knew from the lack of oxygen that it was going to be a very dire situation.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what that would be like. And as you were going through all of this, did you have close friends and family or a partner that you could sort of get support from?
So I did have an amazing partner who I lovingly refer to as her baby daddy, because that's just kind of slang talk for today's world. But we had a very serious relationship. We have been together a number of years when I was younger, and he was with me day and night throughout this whole journey. I think something I really love people to understand is that at 19 years old, and I think he was 20, neither one of us could developmentally process what we were going through. Like in order to paint the picture, at this point, when she got out of the hospital, we then went to a different hospital, a children's hospital, where my baby daddy and I would stay for months on end. We had no money. We literally had nothing. We would sleep on the emergency room floor, and we were subjected on a daily basis to life and death situations, not only life and death of our own daughter, Haley, but also life and death of all of the things that were going on around us that once you see, you could never unsee. I'm talking about, and Allie, I know you have your own young daughter, so this is going to be hard to hear, but things like the children that are in the cancer units, the children that are in the burn units, the children that were coming in the middle of the night because we would be sleeping in the emergency room, families that were coming in that their children had been in a horrific car accident. Wow. So not only did I have like the trauma of what was happening to my own daughter, but this was my entire world. Most people get up, they have their coffee, they go to work. I was just around devastation 24/7.
So what got you out of that to then develop this business at the age of 24?
That's, you really have such insightful questions, because I think that this is very important and good for people to understand, because, one of my missions in life is really to help people have a paradigm shift if they have got trauma in their background. So often trauma, because our bodies are like libraries, and they store everything that's ever happened to us. And one thing that I know after, just years of what I've gone through myself is that we get to that fork in the road, and we're either going to stay in the trauma and our life is just going to become a chaotic mess, or we can develop resilience. And how we develop that resilience, there's a million different paths and a million different outcomes. And, I just have my own personal story to draw from. And I would love to tell you, Allie, that it was this big empowering moment of, I thought I could be big and powerful and successful. But the truth is, it actually came from a place of deep disempowerment. So after my daughter passed away, I did go through some I'm going to call it like teenage regression stuff. I sort of regressed back into being a teenager because I had been in this very adult level situation, right? So I sort of became a teenager again, wanted to hang out with my friends, wanted to do the fun stuff. But there came a time when I was probably about 21, 22, that all of my friends, my peer groups, and when you're that age, your friends are everything. Like my son is 17. He can't bear to be away from his friends for more than 25 minutes without having a total meltdown or, thinking the world's going to end if he can't be with his buddies. So, but there came a time and a place where my friends were graduating college. My friends were moving on. My peer group was moving on. They were getting their first jobs. And a lot of times these were not hourly jobs. These were salary jobs. And I felt like, wow, I felt left behind. You know what I mean? Like I felt like they were getting these wonderful opportunities. And I thought in my little mind at 21, 22, that I would never have an opportunity like theirs because I was super duper hung up on this lack of a college degree. Now, why in the world I didn't just start then, I don't know, but it felt like, I don't know, this belief system I think I had early on that there was like a certain window of opportunity for college. And I had missed that window of opportunity. And now it was time to like move on and do other things. So really, because I felt so far behind, because I felt like, honestly, I don't know if you'll know this saying, but it's like, I felt like I didn't have a pot to piss in. I got sort of desperate and I thought, well, I'm going to open my own business because I thought that that would at least give me a little bit of control over my own destiny.
And so in a way, that sort of motivated you and helped you build resilience. The fact that your peers were being successful in their academic studies.
Looking back, I would absolutely agree. During the whirlwind of when it was happening, I could not have understood the wisdom in what you just said. Do you know what I mean? So in the moments that it was happening, it was 21, 22, 23, my goals, the things that I enjoyed in life were very, very different. And I think I saw the world as a very dog eat dog kind of a place and really just wanted to not starve.
Wow. And so you built this business at the age of 24, and then what happened next? You mentioned you've got a 17-year-old son. How did that come about?
Well, Ellie, if you don't know that by now, yeah, probably the same way your daughter came about. Yeah, I got married. I got married and we planned a family. So I think that because I felt like I had done it the wrong way the first time, with an unplanned pregnancy, that I wanted to do things the right way. So I was trying to establish my life in that picture perfect sort of idealization that I grew up with, like here's my husband, here's my white picket fence with the house. And, you go through, I think I was taught that you go to high school, you graduate, you go to college, you get the husband, you get the career, you get the house, you get the kids, and then for some of us, you get the divorce, you have the breakdown, you file the bankruptcies, you try, you just try to recover from your midlife shenanigans. So I guess that's far cry from how did my 17-year-old get here, but I have two teenage boys. One of them is 19. He is on the spectrum. So I've had a set of challenges there raising a special needs child. And then my 17-year-old who actually just today, I don't know when this show will air, but as of the taping of this show, he just had his last day of high school today.
Wow, congratulations. So you're free. Not quite.
Right.
Excellent. Well, you touched on a couple of points there that I want to sort of come back to, and you mention in your book as well. It's about this limiting belief and your sort of picket fence sort of analogy comes into this as well. And also, you mentioned about your not being able to study because it was just this window of opportunity and you'd missed it. And all of this, I guess, is what you'd refer to as barrier beliefs. And most of our listeners are probably familiar with limiting beliefs, but I love your term in your book, Conscious Communications. You mentioned barrier beliefs. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I'd love to start by telling you the reason I like to call them barrier beliefs as opposed to limiting beliefs is because I really view these beliefs as something that builds a brick wall between you and having that fill in the blank, whatever it is that you want to have. And I try to caution myself about using language such as dream life, because to me, the dream life is living in the beauty of the wisdom that you learn every single day. Going back to the barriers that bind us is these beliefs oftentimes are very, very hidden from us. So, for example, there's obvious ones like, oh, the window of opportunity for college. That's a simple one, but there's deeper ones that plague us all the time that keep us from living into our true potential. So, for example, I am pretty open about the fact that I had wanted to write this book for about 10 years, but I would say all the time, I want to write this book, but I'm not a writer. And so words, I believe, are very powerful because they are a mirror to our subconscious mind. They're a mirror to these barrier beliefs. So when you hear me say the words, I want to write a book, it's like you can see that written on my soul that I've come into this life with this purpose of writing this book. And I have a really big issue or a barrier belief when the next words out of my mouth are, but I'm not a writer, because those words are revealing something unknown to me, which is that somewhere in my history, I have developed a belief system that says I'm actually not capable of writing this book. And that's the important part, because it may be that in the second grade, some English teacher told me, maybe I got an F on a paper. I mean, who knows, right? And it doesn't even necessarily matter. But what's important is to understand that we can break through these barriers. And we can break through these barriers in a number of different ways.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's funny watching kids grow up and how they slowly buy into these beliefs. And I see my daughter doing it, and I'm just like throwing the objection out every time, going, well, why wouldn't you be able to do that? And it's interesting to see how their mind works. But I love how you shared that example. And it's funny because you obviously changed the language and your belief around that, because when I met you, I saw you, before even being a businesswoman, which you clearly are, I see you as an author, number one.
Thank you.
And so you've changed your identity based on the way that you're now talking to yourself, I guess.
It's so true, because the truth is that the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves actually becomes our identity. And, I know you had at least heard my name before we had met. So you did know me as an author, but that's a multiple years journey to be able to fully step into that kind of identity. And, yeah, I just really appreciate you saying that. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So can you talk us through maybe an exercise? I know there's a great one in your book about uncovering these barrier beliefs. How would we go about that?
Well, I think that one of the easy ways to do it is to pay attention to the things that you say. You're hearing your daughter say these things and you're catching them. Being able to do that for yourself. So becoming aware that I was saying the words, but I'm not a writer. And I think that you don't need to necessarily know when and where the belief came from. It's really enough to understand, I have this belief. And then from my standpoint, the important thing is that you take action in the direction that you want to go. So it's not like we have to deep down into our subconscious and try to change our belief by uncovering its whereabouts. The easier method is to take action and actually create a new belief. So because of the way that our neural connections work in our subconscious brain, I think it's actually easier to create a new connection and a new belief versus to go back to an old belief and try to change it. Does that make sense?
So how would you do that? Would you use affirmations?
There's so many different ways, and I'd love to unpack some of the ways. So for example, one of the ways is healing from the past. And I'm not necessarily an expert in that, so I just want to mention it. So it's not that I'm against traditional therapy or any of that. So there is a way to do that by simply healing from your past. The way that I've done it, and the way that's really created a lot of resilience in my life, is a model of taking action in the direction that I want to go. So for example, I'll use my belief about not being a writer as just a metaphor here. So I noticed I was saying I'm not a writer. And I got an opportunity one year to go to Omega Institute, and I was taking my children for Family Week. This was well after I was divorced. And we all had to sign up for workshops. So the teenagers sign up for workshops, the kids, everyone, the adults, everyone signs up for a personal development kind of a workshop. So I was looking at the list of workshops, and one of them was a writer's workshop. And I thought, okay, well, I'll take that one. This was not a lot of action to take on my part because I had to sign up for a workshop anyway. But I remember the very first day of the workshop, and it was taught by a very famous woman. Her name is Cheryl Strayed. She wrote the best-selling book. She's actually written a number of best-selling books. She's best friends with Elizabeth Gilbert. And her most famous book, I believe, is called Wild, which was actually turned into a movie starring Reese Witherspoon. So she was my first writing teacher. And I remember the way I introduced myself that day. I said, "Oh, my name is Mary. I'm not a writer. I don't even know what I'm doing here. I'm a CEO." And then I followed it up with, "I don't even read books," which is ridiculous, Allie, because I probably read more books than anyone I know. But that's how disempowered I was in that moment because I was so intimidated in that class. But what happened was by the end of the class, I had written a short story about my daughter who passed away in 1992. It was about my son on the autism spectrum and just what a lonely world it can be when you're navigating through like the school system with the special needs child and all of the everything you go through raising a special needs child. And I paralleled those things with my roller coaster life as an entrepreneur. And at the end of the week, when I read this short story to the class, no one laughed at me. No one said, "Hey, you're not a writer. You're wasting your time." As a matter of fact, it was the opposite. And people like rushed at me. They wanted to talk to me about my story. They wanted to include it in their newsletters. Like I really got this overwhelming positive response, which in that moment, okay, and here's the breakthrough. In that moment, my brain, my subconscious saw the evidence that would slowly begin to change the way I thought about it. And the way that I thought about it changed the way I felt about it. And the way I felt about it began to change the way, like the words that I was using. Okay. And so slowly that began to change my belief. And within 7 months of that day, I had a book deal with Hay House.
Amazing. So there's obviously a big connection here with feeling and words, but I'm with you in that I believe words just have such power, especially, you know, the way we talk to ourselves. Actually, funnily enough, I have a master's degree in linguistics. So I have a bit of a passion for this sort of area of words and quite fascinated with languages. And it's interesting because in your book you talk about the do not say list, which I want to talk about in a minute. But it's funny because, you know, one of the words that you mentioned there is no. And in Japanese, for example, and I speak fluent Japanese because I lived in Japan and studied Japanese, and there is a word for no, but it's so seldomly used that most, like, it's almost like you don't even learn that word. So I find it interesting how different languages deal with words. So the Japanese, like if I said to you, are you going to come to the party? And you're definitely not going to come, right? You wouldn't say no. You'd say, chotto, which means, and then you'd say something. But that means no. And to a Japanese person, you know 100% that means no. But to a foreigner, they don't hear the word no. So they actually think there's a chance that you're going to come.
Oh, that's interesting.
So you talk about this do not say list. Can you tell us a bit about how that's helped you in your business world, especially in your company, and how you implement that? And also even in your personal life or even in other people's lives, how they can use it?
Yeah. So the do not say list is something that is really a secret to my success. So I created that list in 2005, and I'm in an unusual business, and it's a business that people don't really like to talk about, which is debt collections. And I was interacting with some pretty fierce and fiery and triggered conversations on an everyday basis. And it was exhausting. And I was threatened a lot. My staff would get threatened a lot. And I remember having this defining moment where one day and you have to picture this, I was just exhausted in my office. You know, we were getting phone call after phone call where people were calling us. They were really angry about the fact that they owed this money. And the conversations in general just were not productive. And I just looked at the phone and I said, wouldn't it be really great? I just want the next person who calls to be a little bit happier at the end of the call than they were at the beginning. And this North Star began to develop that I just wanted people to finish happier. And so with all things, and I don't know what they would say this in Japanese, but it's my belief that when you say the word no, you cut your brain off from solutions. And so really what I was commanding my brain to do was to compute the answer for me. How can I make people happy? How can I make people feel good about the fact that they're paying their debt instead of swirling in the shame and the unworthiness of having a debt? And over a little bit of time, the answer started to come to me. The very first thing I did was create this do not say list, because I started to notice, and you probably would appreciate this a lot because of your master's degree, I started to notice that every time I would say one of those negative words, no, not, won't, can't, however, and unfortunately, that people would become very triggered and they would start to freak out. So I actually call it freak out. And my reps would also be afraid because they have fear of the freak out. And so what happens is when you say one of those words, people start traveling down the frequency scale of emotions until they get into that fight or flight response. And the way that this translates to the book is because I started eventually, not in 2005, but many years later, probably 10 years later, I started to question, like, what if I use this on my personal life? And what would that look like? So I started to become very aware of the self-talk, very aware of where I was telling myself no, where I was cutting myself off, where I was not becoming the idea machine that I was meant to become. And it had such a profound effect on me personally and everyone that I was teaching this to, because ultimately that communication strategy that I developed became not just a way that I did business, it became the way that I ran my life.
That's awesome. It's amazing how, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on the show, is because there's such a correlation here between business, life, fitness, health. It's just, it seems to work in all different ways, which leads me, I guess, to my next question about your cleanse or clog. In your book, you talk about, you refer to cleansing or clogging, and you give an example about your diet and how it's the 80-20 thing. And can you tell us a bit about that, and then also maybe even help us who, like, there's a lot of our listeners who sort of want to get fit and healthy, but just aren't really doing it. So how could they use cleanse or clog here?
I love, this is perfect timing, Allie, because I'm actually personally doing, like, I'll just call it a 21-day cleanse or clog challenge for myself. So maybe the listeners would like to do it along with me. Cause, I've had the pleasure of meeting Allie. She's one of the most incredibly fit women I've ever met. I mean, we're talking like Olympic level athlete. And for a lot of years, I actually considered myself to be a gym rat, because I was constantly in the gym. I was eating very, very healthy, but the last couple of years, I'm in my mid 40s. The last couple of years, I've definitely noticed that hormonal shift happening and felt like I was losing a lot of my energy, which changed my daily habit of going to the gym to, like, I'll just be honest and vulnerable here. I haven't stepped foot inside of a gym for probably 6 months.
But that's fine. I mean, that doesn't mean you can't be fit and healthy. In fact, that's definitely a barrier belief.
Exactly. And so what I decided to do, and this is very recently, like in the last couple of weeks, because I have put on some weight. I think a lot of it's hormonal related, and I'm okay with it. A big part of life is just accepting life and knowing where you're at, having a clean lens of perception, as I put it in the book with a Vidya, is, that clean set of knowledge. So what I've decided to do was to look at inflammation. And, I very quickly did some research, like what are the foods that are anti-inflammatory? I put them all on the cleanse list. So cleanse or clog simply means you're going to look at a list of things that are cleansing. Because I always say, like, everything you do is either a cleanse or a clog. It's either creating a deeper connection to what you want, or it's driving a disconnection. And I'll show you in just a moment how this applies to all areas of life. But we start with diet because I think that that's a concept that every single person can understand. So I made this list of all the anti-inflammatory foods. And guess what? It was like all the foods I love anyway. I mean, it's stuff like bone broth, mushrooms, avocados, broccoli, leafy greens, just like pineapples, beautiful food that I love eating anyway. And then I looked up the inflammatory foods, sugar, probably too much coffee, candy, processed foods, hydrogenated oils, really a lot of oils. And I made myself a cleanse list and I made myself a clog list. Now, instead of trying to eliminate the clogs right away, I was like, let me focus the first few days on just how many cleansing foods I can add. So I started doing the apple cider vinegar drink every day. Immediately within 2 days, started to feel better, started to feel like my digestion adjusting, feeling like, hey, this is good. I'm less bloated. I'm already starting to notice a difference. Let me add in the bone broth. Same thing. Within a couple days, I'm like, wow, I'm sleeping better. I feel better. I have more energy throughout the day. This is awesome. Now let me look at what I can eliminate. Okay. Because now that I'm feeling better, maybe I don't need that 3 o'clock in the afternoon Ghirardelli piece of chocolate, the sea salt and the caramel that I love so much. I don't need that extra cup of coffee now. These things are now clogs. So
it's very smart.
I feel like
very smart the way you did that, because by adding, a lot of people, what they do is they go, I'm going to go to diet, and then they go, I'm not having this, I'm not having that, and they feel depleted. Whereas what you're doing is you're actually just giving yourself nourishment and filling yourself up with nourishing foods, and that will actually automatically make those clog foods just disappear, because you won't have room for them anyway.
Yeah, they become less appealing. And the 80-20 rule, this really supports that, because the 80-20 rule isn't about being perfect. But this applies to all areas of life. One of the things that I really feel so much gratitude for, Allie, is living in the world today. Because we're living in a world where things are rapidly changing as far as our mindset and how we think just as human beings. And I think that probably your audience, if they're anything like you and anything like me, they believe in the highest potential. They believe that infinite possibilities are available to all of us. Sometimes where we get a little bit confused, though, is thinking that infinite possibilities is equal to our highest potential. And the truth is that it's not. Infinite possibilities means that anything at all could happen. And that includes the bad stuff. That includes the things that we don't want to have happen. And, people get really into this concept of law of attraction, and then they think, oh, it's not working for me. But it's really the choices that you are making in those thin sliced moments that are either creating that connection to those beautiful things that you want in life, or it's creating a disconnection, meaning it's driving you to your worst nightmare. And so this is really important, because this is the secret sauce of how I overcame all of that trauma, is just to understand all of those small little decisions are either going to cleanse or clog you. So for example, how you would apply this to, say, your relationships is to understand that every word you say in a relationship is either cleansing that relationship or clogging it. I was doing a webinar for my friend the other day, and I talk about this when I'm speaking all the time on stages, but I was doing this webinar for my friend Allison Maslin. She is the best-selling author of the book Scale or Fail, and I was doing this webinar for her private mastermind group. And when I talked about this particular part and my communication strategy, she said, wow, she said, you're so right, because moments ago, my husband had just walked by and complained that his mouth hurt because of his teeth. And my response was, well, why didn't you call the dentist? And she goes, now I see that was a clog, because what I could have said was, oh, I'm so sorry that your mouth is hurting. So one response cleanses, creates a deeper connection, and one response clogs or creates a disconnection. And it's just those simple little things. These are not big, huge things. If you want to talk about this with respect to your career, I'm sure a lot of your audience are career focused people, then it's understanding what are cleanses in your career. Is it things like, being very time integrity, making sure you're on time for your appointments, making sure you're staying on point, you're not wasting other people's times. What are the clogs in your career? Like just doing what I did. Here's some simple cleanses. Here's some simple clogs. With your personal development, or what I really believe is personal development eventually is a foot in the door to spiritual development. And so I look at like, what are my spiritual cleanses and clogs? And that goes to like, what am I feeding my mind with on a daily basis? And again, remembering 80-20, like I am not expecting you to be perfect, because perfection in and of itself is actually a clog. So maybe I like to watch Game of Thrones, and that doesn't really spiritually connect me, but that's part of my 20%. And then for my spiritual cleanse, I'm looking at what am I feeding my mind with? So right now I'm reading a ton of Pema Chodron books. I just love them. I end my day every day with a spiritual teaching, and I begin my day the same way every single day. Those are my cleanses. Some of my clogs might be scrolling through Facebook or Instagram. Those things are fun, but they can become addictive, so you have to be careful with that. You can cleanse or clog your finances. Same thing. Like here's a way people can clog their finances. When they get their tax refund, how they choose to spend that money could either be a cleanse or a clog.
Yeah, I like my favorite one from your book was, and I'm going to obviously not quote verbatim here, but you said basically what other people think of you is none of your business. In your own words, you said that, which is a really great one, because so many people think that other people are thinking about them to start with, and worry about what other people think.
It's so true. Yeah, that would be definitely a clog. And the cleanse would be stepping into your authentic, who you are meant to be. Dropping the judgment. Judgment, we have harsh judgment of ourselves.
I love that. One last thing from your book that I really wanted to touch upon was the core four. And I know how you've actually used this in your own business. And I'd love for you to actually sort of share with our listeners how you've used that, and also how perhaps our listeners could use that in their life for getting fit and healthy. How would you suggest?
I love the core four, and the core four is something I developed last year because in my career, things were getting hectic and it was becoming super overwhelming. And if you have any entrepreneurs or busy moms and dads in your audience, then they're going to know that overwhelm. It's just when you have so many things in your life that you feel like there's no time to get to them all. And so what I noticed as an entrepreneur is I was getting like 17 opportunities come at me every single day. And I was trying to chase all these different rabbit holes, and it was exhausting me. It was actually leading to that sense of burnout that caused my systems crash, which is the health, thing that I'm dealing with now. And so what I figured out was like, I need to pick 4 core areas of focus for my life. So this really goes along with chapter 1 in the book, which is all about focus. So in my personal life, I created a core 4, which is the one I'll reference. And then in my business, I also created a core 4. So in my personal life, my core 4 was healing. It was my relationship with my children, especially because of the age that they are, they won't be with me forever. It was when I said healing, it's really like spiritual healing and my health. The other one was like getting a little bit less cluttered. So I felt like things were pretty cluttered, and really paying attention to myself. And so this helped me make decisions because every decision that I was making had to be put through the lens of this core four. So for example, I was thinking about hiring a service where this woman would come to my house and cook. And when I first looked at it, I thought, no, I'm not doing that. That's too indulgent. I can't afford it. I started going through all the reasons why I did not think that this was a good match for me. But after the core four, I saw it was the perfect match for me. And it turns out in the long run, it was way less expensive than I thought. And because of the way she managed things, it actually didn't cost me any more than the groceries were going to cost me anyway. And so here she was supporting several things because she was doing the food according to Whole30, which was the diet plan that I chose to go on at the time. And she was cooking all the food. So this was a cleanse decision because it supported something in the core four. And so once you determine what your four core areas of focus are going to be for like a year or 2 years. So you get to determine the length of time because maybe it's 6 months. Then what you do is you reverse engineer an action plan or a work back plan to determine like how you're going to achieve those goals. So like first you write the core four, then you write a 1-page action plan. And the 1-page action plan is actually in the last page or the last chapter in the book, Conscious Communications, where I teach you exactly how to write a 1-page action plan. And believe it or not, just that 1-page action plan will change your life.
And Mary, do you recommend prioritizing the core four? Like, let's say, for example, you mentioned that your kids, and you mentioned them as number 2. Now, I'm not sure if that's how you ranked them, but then let's say, for example, you also said that, healing was really important to you. So what if something came up and it involved you had to choose between either healing or your children? Would there be like a priority there in your core four?
So I'm glad you asked me that because the reality is I did choose 4 things, but none of them, they were not in an order like 1, 2, 3, 4. It was just 4 things. Other people, you could actually do it however you want. So I'm not super into rules with this. It could be 4 things. And for somebody, it might have a higher priority. I had one of my core 4 that was definitely less of a priority in my personal one. I would say that most of the time there wasn't any conflicts of priority. And if you are stuck or feeling like you're trying to choose, one thing that is sort of cleanse or clog related is just to ask yourself, let me make this decision based on how much stress it's going to cause or alleviate.
Yeah.
Because obviously so if I'm making a choice with my children, and that's going to cause me stress. So here would be an example in my house with my kids. If you have teenagers, you'll understand this. Mom wants to go to the movies, and mom wants the kids to go to the movies with her. Now, how likely do you think 2 teenage boys are going to be wanting to go to the movies with their mother?
Yeah.
Not very, right? But spending time with my kids is one of my core 4. So I'm thinking, wouldn't this be great? I want to spend time with the kids. Let's go to the movies. But I also realize that the amount of arguing they're going to do with me, they're going to wear me down. And that's going to cause me stress, which is now in conflict with my other core 4 about healing. So I'm making the decision to say, okay, I'm going to invite them to the movies, but if they don't want to go for whatever reason, I'm just going to accept that decision. I'm not going to change their mind. I'm just going to go with it. Does that help?
Yeah, got you. And then I guess another question I have too, and first of all, I'll get you to tell us about your core 4 for your business. And then I'd love to ask you, how then do you, let's say, you have the core 4 for your business, you've got your core 4 for your personal life. And let's say one of your main core 4 for your personal life was to get really fit and healthy. And so you want to commit to a fitness regime, which I know you're about to commit to. But then in your business, one of your core 4s I know is sales. So let's say there's a conflict there. How do you decide, well, is it your business core 4 that you should sort of prioritize here, or is it your fitness?
That's a great question too. I think that my answer is that doesn't necessarily, whatever my business core 4 is, doesn't necessarily mean I'm personally responsible for each one of those things. So I can't imagine that they're going to be in conflict. Now, what would create a conflict, Allie, is if I had 17 points of focus in my personal life and 17 important goals in business. Can you see how that would create a conflict? But
Gotcha.
that actually, by limiting it to 4, I never really experienced any conflicts. So for example, with sales, my job is to create a sales strategy, make that a wildly important goal. And then once I have that strategy, deliver it to my team so that they can execute on the strategy. And then my job becomes less and less. And sales was one of the core 4. They were sales because the previous 2 years had been heavy investment years for us. So we invested in a new website. We invested in a new marketing strategy. We invested in new branding. We spent a lot of money to redevelop our corporate image. And so sales was the natural next step to use all of this marketing. Another one of the core 4 was actually using our branding to the fullest, which meant going through all of our documents and making sure every single document was branded, whether we were sending out a proposal, whether we were sending out a meeting agenda, making sure that everything was matching, that our customer experience or our client experience was matching up to our brand promise in look, feel, and value. Another one of the core 4 for business was more industry involvement. So one of my missions is that I want to really change the face of debt collections, meaning that I want to spend time and energy and effort into training other debt collectors to bring back the humanity in an otherwise, I'll just say, humanitarian minus type of situation. We should all be working to make the world a better place. And that starts with changing the motivation and debt collections from fear to something more positive. So industry involvement was another big one of those. So we have sales, we have branding, we have industry involvement, and then we also had creating an online program. So an online program was just taking my teachings and translating that into what other businesses could easily use if they did not have the opportunity to work with me one-on-one or bring me in to their company.
Awesome. So if our listeners want to know more about you and about the sort of services that you offer, as well as about your current book, which I know they can buy on Amazon, where else can they go to find out more about you?
Yeah, my biggest ask is if you resonate with my story or you want to learn more, the very best place to do that is on Amazon. Check out the book Conscious Communications. Read the description and a handful of reviews. I believe you'll know right away whether it's a good book for you or not. Outside of that, of course, I have my website, maryshores, SHORES.com. I always have lots of free resources on there, so I invite you to check that out. I also have a Facebook group that we interact with on a daily basis. It's called Fearless Ambition. So you are all welcome to join that Facebook group. My favorite social media platform is actually LinkedIn. So if any of you are on LinkedIn, I invite you to send me a connection request. I will absolutely accept it. Of course, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, every place.
That's cool. And of course, I'll put those in the show notes as well. Mary, I've got to ask you a bit of a personal question. Not that I haven't asked you several of those already, but do you have a tattoo?
I do not. Do you?
Well, I'm not allowed to discuss it. I've actually said, talked about this in someone interviewed me on the podcast, but I ask all my guests if they've got a tattoo, and I'm fascinated to know why you don't.
It's really not any big answer other than when I was younger, the boys were getting tattoos, and I just didn't find them attractive. And that's it. I'm much more open to them now. In fact, sometimes I even find them on men to be quite sexy. I guess I don't like pain. And I realize life is such a journey. So I don't know, why I would want a tattoo. It's such an interesting question.
Cool. Look, thank you so much for your insights. And I really recommend the book Conscious Communications to anyone. So get on Amazon and buy it. Thank you again, Mary. Loved it.
Thank you so much. Have a beautiful rest of your day.
For all the resources and show notes from today's episode, please go to www.ally.fitness. If you liked today's episode, please show your appreciation by going to iTunes, give us a 5-star review and subscribe.